was quite a big journey into entrepreneurship because they don't train you on anything about startup life and what it means to go from 0 to 1 with something. And I think that was a big shock for us, which we probably didn't realize at the time. It's a very different way of thinking. There's the saying that a startup is not a small version of a big business. It's a different thing and requires a very different skill set that actually took us a bit of time to learn.
I'm Hattie Willis, your host, and each episode I talk to an entrepreneur, investor, or startup expert to unpack their hardest moments, biggest wins, and hard-earned advice so we can shortcut our learnings as founders together.
What's it like to go from corporate employee to founder to corporate employee? At Not My First Guest, we love a squiggly career path. That's one reason we were so excited to have serial founder and once again corporate employee Adam Goodall share his journey and lessons learned, from taking the first step into full-time entrepreneurship to deciding when to sell, to why he's enjoying being back in someone else's company. Adam is a serial founder with 2 startups under his belt, ProConfirm and Coconut. With a background in accounting at PwC, Adam's focused on innovating in spaces that may not seem sexy, but have huge potential for growth. Adam first co-founded a startup with his roommate, Samuel O'Connor, who he would also co-found Coconut with too, when their work at PwC led them to spot an opportunity to digitise the manual process of verifying client finances. They originally built ProConfirm as a side hustle while working those corporate jobs, but one of Adam's biggest lessons was when to take the leap to full-time. They soon gained traction, leading to acquisition interest from a major US player. Post-acquisition, Adam discovered his love for product management, setting him on the path to their next venture, Coconut, on a mission to simplify tax and accounting software for sole traders, landlords, and their accountants. Since selling Coconut, Adam has now returned to employee life at Funding Circle and is brilliantly honest about what it was like to get a job as a serial founder, both the hard and the easy bits. Together we'll explore how to find great ideas when you are and aren't looking for them, Adam's hard-won lessons on raising for Coconut, even as a second-time founder with an exit under his belt, how to know when an acquisition offer is right for you, advice on validating your idea before building the right product, what an MVP should and shouldn't be, and how we build a robust identity as founders so we can fully embrace a squiggly career path. We hope you love the episode as much as we enjoyed recording it. Adam, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So
excited to be here.
Excited to have you. We are going to try and cover a lot because you are, in fact, a serial founder, 2 startups under your belt.
Yeah.
I know. Very simple. So let's get into your startup journey.
Sure.
Can you give us, because I know you started at a consultancy, Big Four, This is not the startup life. You were doing the accounting track. When did entrepreneurship become a path you started considering?
Yeah, so out of university, did a maths degree, didn't really know what I wanted to do. And so applied to PwC, got in their audit track. And I think it was, probably not that far into the journey that I decided that probably wasn't the career path I'd ultimately take. But I'd always been interested in entrepreneurship and technology. And so I was looking for an opportunity for that. I think one of the things I found about being in sort of accountancy and audit was you were always checking the work that someone else had done and learning about all these exciting things and customer problems that other businesses had been solving but never actually doing it yourself. So I wanted to do something where I was more close to the customer and actually solving problems for people. And I also met my co-founder at PwC that I ended up doing 2 startups with, called Sam O'Connor, and we both had a pain point that we encountered at PwC, which was when we needed to verify the bank balances and loan arrangements of the clients. We would have to write letters and post them off and tear our hair out when the banks hadn't replied to those, when you've got a deadline looming. And so we saw an opportunity to create an online version of that, pretty straightforward. It was inspired by a US company that was doing the same thing over there but hadn't really made it into the UK yet. But that was really, it was finding a co-founder, having an idea that we thought could work, and that was really how we started on that journey.
And you guys were living together as well.
And we were living together.
Was that good? Tell me about that, because I have a ton of assumptions. I love my housemates. Please don't listen and hate me. I don't think they listen. But what was that like?
Yeah, it was good. I remember there was one moment where at the beginning we got a big A0 pad of paper and strung it up all over the walls and mapped out what the business plan could be. But I think coming out of that accountancy background, it was quite a big journey into entrepreneurship, because they don't train you on anything about startup life and what it means to go from 0 to 1 with something. And I think that was a big shock for us, which we probably didn't realize at the time. It's a very different way of thinking. There's the saying that a startup is not a small version of a big business. It's a different thing and requires a very different skill set that actually took us a bit of time to learn, and we made a lot of mistakes along that journey, I think.
What were some of the biggest, I guess, expectations versus reality that you just had no idea because you'd been through this very different path?
It's a good question. You always think it's going to be faster, I think, than it is.
Such a good one, yeah.
So it took us quite a long time with that first startup to actually go full time on it. We actually left PwC and took other jobs for a bit, just finance jobs, while we then sort of did it on the side. And it was quite slow going. We did it the opposite way of lean startup thinking, where we sort of built the product first. We found a technical co-founder called Matt, and he helped us build the product before we then went to go and try and sell it, which is not what you should do. You should try and get some interest before you start building the product. But it was lessons like that were quite hard for us to learn.
Yeah.
We also had these other jobs and we went full time on it. I remember there was a moment where we went to a Institute of Chartered Accountants dinner at one point to drum up some business.
That sounds fun.
Yeah. And I remember we were sat next to someone there who's an entrepreneur as well. I remember he said to us, we told him what we were doing and doing it on the side. And he said, "You're not going to be successful until you quit your job." And that rattled with us for a few days. And then gradually Sam went full-time first, and then I went full-time a bit later. And yeah, within a few months, we'd got a potential partnership with the UK Banking Association, and the US company that hadn't really entered into the UK yet was looking to acquire us. So I think that was a lesson that, you know, it is hard to do things on the side, but everyone's different, right? But I think, yeah, for us, I would probably have leapt a bit sooner and we could have made more progress.
And it sounds like, without me leading, but it sounds like there's this combination of test a different way, so prove the demand earlier, which allows you to take the leap quicker. Is that a fair characterization? Am I putting words in your mouth?
No, that's exactly it. Yeah, I think it was something we learned when we did Coconut, our second startup, where we built a wait list of people interested before we wrote a line of code on the new product based on what the product would be. And so building minimum viable products and testing your assumptions was, by the time we did the second startup, a muscle that we'd learned and helped us to get that one off the ground.
And I want to come back to Coconut, because I just feel like there is going to be so many of these moments where how you built ProConfirm changes how you build Coconut. I want to come back to that potential acquisition though. Well, not potential, we know it does happen.
Yeah.
But you're starting to get this interest. You, as you said, a few months out of going full time on this. What was the discussion between you as co-founders? How did you decide to take that acquisition? What were you weighing up?
Yeah, we were weighing up between going head to head with this big American company or becoming part of them. And that was, I remember as we went through the process with our lawyer, she said, this sort of thing doesn't usually work. And I think because we set up that company, we knew what the US company was doing. It's called confirmation.com, like really good set of guys. They've been very successful with that business. They had been trying to get into the UK, but probably needed someone with a British accent to crack the market. And so that was their interest in us, because we had made some inroads, particularly with the associations. But part of our DNA was almost going head to head and looking for all the weak spots and things that we thought was wrong with their product and how we can go up against it. And so there were quite a few moments post acquisition of that tension with them where you do have to swallow your pride somewhat, but we were able to swallow it enough, I think, to do a good job there. The mission was still there and we still delivered what we wanted to, which was solving that problem for the market. By the end, within about 2 years, onboarded about 50 banks, quite a few of the high street banks included within that. And so after that, it was the role transition for me into quite a sales, pretty much pure sales by the end. And what I'd learned through doing ProConfirm and building that product was I'd started to think about where my career path goes as well in terms of what am I? Because I'm not an accountant anymore. So I discovered that what I was doing, working with developers and designers to build a product, was a thing called product management. And it's what I fell in love with back then. It's what I do now. And it's the mix of understanding customers, solving problems for them, being strategic, setting a vision, but also the nuts and bolts of getting stuff built and out the door as well. And so it's a very generalist role. And I think that really suited me. And it was what I wasn't going down the track of while I was sort of 2 years in at confirmation.com post-acquisition. So that was when I decided to leave, and I was working in Level 39 in Canary Wharf, which is a fintech accelerator or incubator rather, and seeing a lot of exciting startups around and seeing the opportunity there. I think we were next door with Revolut when they were just two guys working on it at the time. And so I still had a bit of a bug in me for it and managed to convince Sam of the same. So we ended up both leaving together and starting something new.
And just a quick check, because I think not all founders know this coming in, you know, often you do have, was 2 years the end of your earn out period. So normally in an acquisition, big companies acquiring you like to tie in the top talent, normally the founders, maybe some other key hires. So you have this kind of period, which sometimes we call golden handcuffs, sometimes the earn out period, where you have to keep working for them. Yeah.
So it was a 3-year earn out period. So I did sacrifice some of the back half of that on the basis of it wasn't going in the direction career-wise that I wanted to be. Because I think if I'd stuck that out, I would have then been a salesperson, which wasn't what I wanted to do. And it didn't really lead me on to the next thing, whatever that was going to be. So yeah, did make a choice there to leave early.
I love that, because I think it's something we're not great at as a founder ecosystem is we don't tend to detach the founder career from the company growth. Yeah. And so often the whole focus is, where is the company going? And then when do I leave it? But to your point, you're thinking very actively. And I want to come back to this because ultimately you are now an employee again.
I am,
having been a serial founder. And I want to touch on that in the end, because I think for lots of people, this is something we're not really talking about is how squiggly can your founder journey move?
Yeah.
Let's stick with the chronology for my poor ADHD brain, which will otherwise take us every which way. So you and Sam, again, I love this. Are you still living together?
No, we've both got wives.
You've got some separation from work and home.
But we do live about 20 minutes walk away.
I love that. This is very wholesome.
Not intentionally, but it worked out.
I don't believe you. I sense a deep kind of relationship here. Okay, so you start to get the startup itch again.
Yeah.
How did you come about the problem of Coconut? Because I think you've done such a good job as well of explaining ProConfirm came from such a clear problem that you were solving.
Yeah.
You then talked about actually this product management role of being very problem solving focused. So it feels like this is just such a clear thread for you.
Yeah.
So where does the next problem, like how do you encounter it?
Yeah. So it was a bit different, the next one. It was a bit more of a future gazing process where we sat down. We actually had a third potential co-founder involved, who actually became one of our investors in the end.
Okay.
A chap called Roger. And we had seen that the three of us were all accountants through training turned tech entrepreneurs of some kind, for lack of a better word. And we had been thinking a lot about the future of accountancy, and ultimately there'd been a report actually that had come out of Oxford Uni, which I think you went to, that had been looking at AI and this was 2015. This was it was looking at AI and the impact that's going to have on certain industries, and it said accountancy has 99% chance of being automated out of existence. And the question really was, what does that look like? What does a world look like where business owners don't have to do their books, don't have to do their taxes, because it's all just automated and happens in the background invisibly? And we ended up going back to, it's all about the data and the cash, and ultimately the money running through your current account. You got to go back to source with it. And there was a lot of innovation happening back then around being able to launch banking products on top of other banks' licenses in a much more nimble way.
Yeah, so it used to take so long to get regulatory.
Yeah, getting a banking license typically costs you £5 to £10 million before you can accept the first deposit and then the rest. And so by partnering with other providers, it became possible to do that on a few £100,000. So we could see a world where we could create something that was tapping into that data and automating the process through to tax return for self-employed people ultimately, because we then came at it from the other direction of, this is all well and good, but what's the actual customer problem?
Yes, I love that.
So then we started to tackle that by doing a load of customer interviews, asking, tell me about how you manage your finances as a freelancer or self-employed person, small business owner, and honed in on the way that the pains kind of manifest emotionally to people is really often around taxes, not knowing what the tax bill's going to be, getting surprise tax bills. And so what we wanted to do for the first product was create something that would be essentially a current account that would automate your taxes just by the virtue of using it. So that was kind of how it all started. The way we got to market with that was back to the point around MVPs and testing and validating things. One of the challenges we had was, mentioned it would take a few £100,000 to get going. For ProConfirm, we hadn't raised money for that. We'd bootstrapped, so put our own
kept working your jobs and
worked other jobs, and that was that. So actually going into this startup was the first time we needed to raise money, having not done that before. And also having not raised before, there's a bit of a chicken and egg thing where investors like second time founders that have raised before.
I hear this all the time. Founders are like, sorry, how?
So actually got to go through the first one to get to the second one somehow.
Yeah.
Just to rewind a second, you asked before about the reason for selling a competitor and swallowing pride. The reason for that is we didn't think this would necessarily be the last startup, and actually having that under our belt meant that we could go on to kind of the next one from there. And so going down that road, we needed to raise money, but we hadn't done that before. And if you're a second, third time founder, if you've had successful exits, that's enough validation to raise money without much traction. For us, we needed to have a bit more proof.
Okay. Because you hadn't raised
because we hadn't raised before. We hadn't returned money to investors before.
Got it.
So we first started to build out what we could without spending money. So that's marketing website for it, building a wait list, promoting the idea, and doing some testing as well around like ads testing, showing, okay, with this marketing message, we can actually acquire people for this cost. We're building up a waiting list. We're speaking with people who are getting excited about what it is we're doing. We've got mock-ups of the product that we can show to people and have them click around on, even though it's not real. And then eventually that led to us trying to build a working prototype, which was very clunky. We managed to build something. I think we'd raised the first bit of seed money at this point and managed to build a sort of throwaway MVP that was built on a very quick and dirty prepaid debit card.
And I just want to touch on that for a second as well, because beautifully you use the term MVP, which you, for some of you may be new, for some may not, and you've explained what is minimum viable product.
Yeah.
But actually, I think you've done a great job. Often I think people think of minimum viable product as exclusively what you just talked about, which is the kind of working prototype, which is the smaller, crummier version of your end goal. But you also talked about earlier, when you talked about all those tests you ran, you described them as MVPs.
Yes.
And I think founders get caught up in thinking, I'm being asked to build a rubbish first version of my product and I don't have any money. But actually, to your point, there are these smaller MVPs that test the demand, that test your marketing channels, that can be so powerful to getting you the money for the other bits if they really need money.
Yeah. And I've regretfully used the word MVP about 3 times so far, and I try to avoid using it because I think it's such a misused term. But I think I managed to substitute it for working prototype just before. But it's a really confusing term because I think how it sounds like a crummy version of a product.
Yeah, exactly.
But that's not the essence of what it was originally defined as. In the book Lean Startup by Eric Ries, it defines it as the smallest thing you can do to test your riskiest assumption, or words to that effect. And so if you're doing a landing page and seeing if people sign up, if you're having a customer interview actually and asking them questions, that's an MVP technically.
You can come and teach my Lean Startup workshop. That's what I say every time. I love it. Got another trainer out of this interview.
There we go.
Adam doesn't know it yet.
Yeah. So I try, because of that, I do try to not actually avoid using the word where I can, because I think it does get confused quite a bit, and people think it has an implication in people's mind as to what you're talking about with it.
And I do just think, particularly first-time founders, and I definitely found this. The guy who very kindly introduced me to the world of Lean Startup and this idea of minimum viable products. But before that, I'd have thought the first step is you build a small version.
Yeah.
And actually, I do think once you start meeting other founders, you hear all of these stories, and this is why we try and do the podcast, of how people tested. And you start to think, oh, actually, I could test that way, or I could use that.
Yeah.
And so much for me has been about learning how other people have experimented to then make me think, stretch what I think is possible without budget, with not much time, without that resource.
Yeah. I still remember the time I was reading Lean Startup on the tube when we were working on ProConfirm and having a bit of a eureka moment, being like, oh, we've been doing it all wrong. And so, I think it's an important read for anyone that's sort of starting a business. I think actually I read a lot of books. There's a thing called the Lean series, and that extends from it with all the other similar topics that deep dive on individual threads. So like running lean analytics, lean UX. There's lots of good peripheral reading around that for anyone that's looking to do a startup.
While we're on the topic, and I did not put this in the show notes, so you've got to do it on the fly. Any other favourite books that you want to recommend to founders? Lean Startup, always a great read, and as you say, the series.
So for founders, I read a really good book recently actually called Decisive by Chip and Dan Heath. They've done a few good books.
Yes. A lot on kind of the psychology. Yes.
But it talks a lot about all of the different biases that we have in decision making, and they digest a lot of research for the book, which is often a bit heavy going for mere mortals, and they try to digest it down into actual usable ways of managing your decision making process and catching when you might be falling into the common traps. And so I think that one is a recent favorite.
Did you read anything, because it strikes me the way you were talking about doing your customer development was what I think of as the right way. And I think this is a bit of another space where it's really easy to get it wrong. Like we think, go and talk to customers. Great, you go and talk to customers, and actually it's infinitely more easy to get bad, misleading, biased data that lets you run down the path you wanted to run down for a long time before you realize you were wrong. Was there anything you read that helped you there? Or anything you watched or were told, any advice you got? It doesn't have to just be a book.
Yeah. The thing is, I feel like I've made that mistake so many times, despite reading a lot of stuff to the contrary. And this is the thing, I think putting things into practice is just as important as knowing the theory as well. I think as well, having come out the other side of sort of 10 years of startups and reflecting on everything, it's quite painful at times looking back at the things that are quite blindingly obvious when you look back, but then at the time it felt like the right thing to do. So yeah, I mean, it's all the above in terms of the things to read, but I think the experience is really important, and I think forgiving yourself a bit when you do make mistakes, because you've got to go through the reps to build the muscle, and that takes time.
I think that's such an important piece of advice, because I literally teach half this stuff. Doesn't mean I don't mess it up, because actually the reason we have to teach it is because our brains think there's a better way intuitively. And so we've got to untrain them. Exactly.
Natural human instincts with this stuff, right?
100%.
It's why there's, the same, like, history repeats itself for a reason.
Has to. Nobody listens.
Yeah.
So while we're on the topic of mistakes, not to dwell on them, but really curious, are there others that you learned the hard way that you want to share with founders? Maybe they'll still make them, as we said. Some of this is you can hear it and you'll still do it, but maybe they'll be kinder to themselves after they've made it, knowing they weren't alone.
Exactly. Yeah. I think one thing that comes up quite a bit in my conversations with founders is around fundraising and when to raise. I think for Coconut we raised quite early in the journey, despite all the stuff that I just talked about, because we still to get that first working prototype out the door. Myself nor Sam were technical co-founders. We didn't have a technical co-founder at that stage. We brought in a CTO a bit further down the line. And so we needed someone to build the thing. I think, and that's the most expensive bit for a tech business, that and acquiring customers if you need to pay for that as well. And knowing what I know now, I think there's two ways of doing that more cheaply, which is either just do a coding course
love that
and do it yourself, or there's actually really good no code tools out there now, like Bubble, Retool, that you can actually build stuff that can sustain thousands of users without breaking a sweat. The point there, though, is the first check that you accept from someone's like the most expensive one, because your valuation's lowest, and it feels fine at the time, but what we found is as you raise more, you get diluted. And I think if I could do it again, I would try and get as far as possible without raising money, because your valuation is going to be higher, and potentially can you even not raise at all. I sometimes speak to founders who are starting out and looking to raise just almost to fund the founder stipend, and that's it. And I think it's such an expensive way to do that. I think there's a thing that happens, and this has definitely happened to us, is when you look out at the startup ecosystem, it looks like everyone's raising money, and particularly everyone's raising VC money, because news outlets pretty much exclusively write about VC-backed companies, because it's a signal to the news outlets that is a company worth writing about. And they've also got the connections, right? So it means that the news streams look as if all startups are raising from VC, but it's actually the vast minority of businesses that do that, and they're looking for a very specific thing as well, because of the nature of they might invest in 10 companies, 5 of them are going to be write-offs, 4 will wash their face, and 1 will pay off the other 9.
Pay what they've promised in
and the return
investors
to the investors that they've got from pension funds and things. And so that dynamic means you all need to be possible to be the one, which means you need to be setting your sights on $1 billion valuations potential.
100%.
And so a lot of businesses just don't fit in that category, and you don't need to be going down the VC fundraising route. And there's loads of other alternatives for funding, from angel funds, crowdfunding, debt finance, that founders can be looking at, or side jobs as well. So there's many ways of
could not agree more. Totally aligned. I mean, one of the reasons I started If We Raise is exactly that. I'm fed up of founders feeling like that's the only thing that validates them as founders. And it's, as you say, it's a really expensive mistake to make. Can you just explain for listeners who may be going, what is dilution? Why do I need to worry about it? What mistakes are possible to make there?
So when you're raising, you'll typically raise an amount of money, and you'll give away a portion of your company for that. Think Dragon's Den with, I'm raising 100 grand for 5%. And if they were doing that, would be valuing a business £2 million if
Much better maths than me.
5% of
Thinking, oh God, don't look at me.
but every time you do that, you give away another chunk of the business. And so the more times you raise, the portion that you have as the founder goes down. So, often companies that are selling for hundreds of billions of dollars, the founders may have very small percentages left. I went through the Techstars accelerator program, which is one of the world's biggest accelerator programs next to Y Combinator, back in 2017. And I think one of the stats they shared was that the average payout for a successful founder is £2 million or dollars. But you compare that to the size of the exits that they're talking, it's tens, hundreds, millions, billions of dollars on the exits, but the founders don't always get a huge chunk of that at the end of the day.
And back to your earlier point, I just think it's really helpful for founders to understand that actually exactly this, it's easy to think that the biggest financial payout comes from getting the company to the biggest possible size.
Yeah.
But actually you could sell a company for a smaller amount. If you own a bigger share, you can often walk away with either the same or sometimes even more.
If you own 100% of a business worth £10 million is...
100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah.
Getting very meta here.
Yeah.
So really helpful on the dilution, really helpful on the challenge around fundraising. And I think coming to this point of funding strategy, one of the important points, as well as a financial outcome, is what's driving you as a founder. Can you talk a little bit to that piece and what you wish founders thought more about, other than just the financial return when they think about funding strategy and growing the business?
Yeah, definitely. Because I don't want to make it sound like it's all doom and gloomy, not going to get the financial reward, right? Because I think, obviously that was a part of going down the startup track, was there is that potential for outsized earnings. If you compare it to doing a salaried job, to become a millionaire from a salaried job is going to take you a very long time these days. But I think the other benefits and kind of motivations for doing it are I'll kind of speak for myself in terms of I've always believed in the mission of the company and the problem that we're trying to solve, and that's what would get me out of bed in the morning. I think also a big part of it is learning so much and enjoying the process as well, such that if it did not work out, it's all going to be fine at the end of the day.
That's hard. How did you keep that balance? Sorry, I just want to do...
Yeah, I've made that sound easy, but
that sounded great. How do you do that, Adam? Tell us your secret.
Yeah, and I don't know if I always managed it. I think, it did go through moments of despair and questioning if it would all be okay. But I think coming out the other side of that now, it has all been okay. And so I think hopefully that's in some way reassuring. And same for my co-founder as well. He's got a couple of really good gigs since finishing up at Coconut last year.
You've perfectly segued me to my final two questions before we go to the quick fires. I want to touch on the decision to sell Coconut. We talked about the decision to sell ProConfirm. What's the same? What's different? What was going through your head the second time? And we can come back to this question as well. But this point of it being okay to stop being a founder and to go and get a salaried job, to change actually what mechanic you want to drive your career forward, I think is actually not talked about really at all.
Yeah.
So I'd love to just spend some time on that as well.
Sure. With Coconut coming to an end, at least for me, it's still going, I'm happy to say. In 2021, there was some regulation written into law around... It's a thing called Making Tax Digital for Income Tax. Yep. And it was a reaction from HMRC around them believing that self-employed people are making a lot of errors, either intentional or accidental, on their tax returns. And there was a big black hole of tax that wasn't being collected. So they have this new regulation planned to come in that got put into law in 2021 that will introduce quarterly tax filing for self-employed people and landlords as well, pretty much as a digital bookkeeping mandate. And so today, sole traders, not that exciting or engaged by accountancy products generally, but when this does land, then that would be a huge influx to that market. And so where we'd ended up as a business, and we've skipped over a few pivots along the way. By this point, we're not doing the current account anymore.
Yeah.
We are focused on helping accountants to prepare for this impending regulation by having a accounting product that's specifically designed for their smallest clients, who are going to be the long tail of clients that they have to get onto bookkeeping software, because traditionally they would just send a shoebox of paperwork at the end of the year. And so we're seeing a lot of success through 2022 because of that regulation was scheduled to come in.
Yeah.
It unfortunately got delayed again just before Christmas, like a few days before Christmas.
Happy Christmas.
Yeah, happy Christmas. We were mid-funding round.
Oh no.
And whilst it was the first time that had been delayed since it was written into law, it was in our very first slide deck, like, this is coming. This is a bit of the why now behind the story of doing
very
it.
strong why now.
And we, like many other vendors that were all trying to do the same thing, some of them had to go down to skeleton crews, some had to refinance and go to their investors. What we didn't see a path through to was to just go into maintenance mode for 3 years to the new date of 2026.
Such a big move.
Because by the time we got there, the bigger players would have
had time to
because we were having to make sure that we were positioned right. And so we decided to look for an acquirer, and we were successful in doing that. We found a company up in Manchester called Pennine Ventures. They own a thing called Go Simple Tax that's one of the biggest self-assessment products in the UK. And so really good fit because we hadn't done the actual filing bit. We've done everything up to it.
Nice.
So it's great now. They've actually integrated the two products together. So it's really cool to see it kind of take a new lease of life on. And so after that, decided to not do another startup after that and to look for employment instead.
That process, how transparent were you with your team? Because I think this is something founders don't really know. And you hear it both ways, but I'm always really curious about this. If you're trying to lead a team, you're going through this process where the environment is super against you suddenly, or suddenly the wind that was pushing you forward has dropped out of sight. Was that a decision you were actively making? Was it something you did very intuitively? Curious about that piece.
Yeah, so when the news of the delay came out, we were really open with the team about the impact of that and the plan. And so they were all super supportive about that. Everyone agreed to go part-time for a bit to help us weather the storm and try to go through the process of finding an acquirer with us. And so part of that was being open with them and setting the expectation and keeping them constantly updated through the process. I hope I'm still in touch with a lot of them. I think it's one of the things that I really loved about doing the startup journey was like the team that we built there were really great, still in touch with a lot of them. And I think, I was really grateful, particularly for that moment, for everyone sticking by us through what was quite a painful few months.
Final bit I want to touch on is coming back to this, what's next for you, or what's now for you. How much identity did you have tied into being a founder? And also, I think the other part of this, and you've written a really great article about how founder skills are and aren't rewarded, perceived within the kind of corporate ecosystem. There's some excitement around it depending on how recent that own company's growth has been. Yeah. There's often fear if it's a really established corporate or quite far from founder-led. I'm really curious about this part of founder identity to employee identity, as well as trying to sell yourself into corporates who maybe didn't see the immediate fit.
Yeah, I think the founder identity piece is, it's different for everyone. I think for me, it's always been, this is the answer to both questions. It's about the impact that I can have in the role. And so through doing the startup track, that's how I felt I could have an impact, because I saw an opportunity to do it. I think taking what I've learned over that stretch and applying that in somewhere more established now, actually I see a huge opportunity for continuing to have that impact now and actually bringing something quite unique into a bigger company where not many people have gone through that founder track.
And it also strikes me,
this is going to sound like a backhanded compliment, but it's definitely not the way I mean it. But one of the themes I think that came up when we were talking about the ProConfirm acquisition was having to actually hold back ego.
Yeah.
And I think there is this, I don't know, for me at least, this idea of going and working for someone, having run my own thing. Like for me, there would be ego tied up in that. I'd have to let go of a lot of ego from going to being in control and setting the course. And I love the way you framed it as the impact being the driver. And I suspect that allows you to put ego more easily aside.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, I think there are some people who are like, can't work for someone else. And it's about the autonomy of running their own thing, and that's also great. Like if that's what your motivation is, then go for it. But I think it's weirdly not been too challenging. That I think also one of the difficult things about doing a startup is you're at the top, particularly from a product perspective. This is the first time now that I'm reporting to someone who's a product leader in the field. And so previously everything I'd had to learn was off my own back. And as a result of that, had quite a few challenges along the way, trying to work with other people in the team who are looking to me for leadership and management with actually much less experience than some of the people in the team. And so it's been quite nice going somewhere and actually having someone that you can run stuff by and they will tell you. We actually set up, one thing that worked quite well for us at Coconut was identifying this. We did end up setting up a sort of external mentorship thing where both for myself and other people in the team, brought in by our COO at the time, Pete Finlay. And that was really valuable because everyone, I think, sees very few different companies in their career to the point where for any of us to think we know what like best practice looks like is made up. And so I think the more we can learn from having those connections to others and learning from others' experience and putting a bit of structure around that as well, I think is really valuable. So even now I have various people I call on to kind of ask questions and things outside of my day job and try to offer the same to others as well.
Leads me perfectly onto our final 2 quickfire questions.
Great.
First question, what is the best piece of advice you've ever been given?
Do you know what? I think it's probably the piece I mentioned earlier actually about you need to quit your job bit, because I think if we hadn't had that message, I think everything would have played out very differently if we hadn't gone full time on it and made the progress that we had. So when I think of the most impactful bit, that was a moment that was a bit of a turning point for us.
Final question, what is your proudest moment? You've had 2 startups. A lot of life in between.
It's a tough one because I think probably I don't know how other people answer this, but I think it's probably a thing that a lot of founders struggle to see the success in what they've done. But I think it's definitely reflecting just before coming on here, I think thinking about the team that we had set up and the fact that when we did go through that tough time towards the beginning of last year, the support that they were willing to give us through that was quite meaningful. I've worked with tons of great people over the last few years through that journey and still in touch with a lot of them and thankful for them coming on the journey with us.
I love it. And it's amazing as well now you're still focused on helping startups from a different angle with Funding Circle. Yeah. So we will obviously also put a link to that in the show notes as well, but do follow Adam. We'll put links to check him out on socials and keep asking kind of questions. Plague him on LinkedIn, hound him for mentoring.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Adam's like, what is Hattie promising at the end of this? But thank you so much for sharing all of your incredible insights, your story.
You.
It's been a pleasure having you on the show.
Cheers, Hattie.
Beautiful.
Thank you for listening. Before you go, please do take a minute to follow so you never miss another episode. We have some incredible founders coming up. And I always love to hear what resonates with listeners. So do drop us a direct message on Instagram @NotMyFirstGuest with any moments that meant something to you, ideas for future episodes, or your own entrepreneurial stories you want to share. Until next time, happy startupping.